Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the committee as a whole. We're going to get started here with our meeting. We got 5 items on our agenda tonight. Let's see. Kim, roll call, please.
Thank you. Council President Kaur,
Here.
Councilmember Boyce,
Here.
Councilmember Boyd,
Here.
Councilmember Fincher,
Here.
Councilmember Larmer,
Here.
Councilmember Michaud,
Here.
Councilmember Troutner.
Here.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to item number 3 for agenda approval. Pat, any changes to agenda? Team, any changes? Ask for a motion, please.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion passed. Okay, we're going to move on to item number 4, department presentation. The first one is under the council president. We have the approval of the minutes from March 4th. Can I get a motion, please?
So moved.
Motion and second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion unanimous pass. Move on to item B, payment of the bills. We had a chance to go through that, so I'm going to ask for approval of the bills.
Second.
We got a motion and second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Let the record show unanimous pass. Now we'll move on to item number C, consultant service agreement with CC Kermy LLC. We have IT Director Mike Carrington. Mike.
Great. Thank you, Councilmember Boyce. Good afternoon, council members. Good to be with you. Mike Carrington, IT Director. For your consideration, we have the authorization and ratification of one of 3 consulting service agreements in IT, CC Kermy LLC specifically. CC Kerman is the principal program and project manager, and she brings both a rare mix of cybersecurity as well as IT infrastructure experience and expertise to the department. something quite honestly that we do not have with our current staffing model. Her engagement with us is earmarked for a specific body of work, in particular with James Endicott's cybersecurity team, as well as his infrastructure team. Her assigned projects and her forecasted allocation is through the duration of the biennium. This contract's budget is an outlay of $440,000 and is a portion of the council-approved $1.1 million IT temp staffing budget. As is normal practice, we also remain committed to monitoring agency fees real closely in an effort to ensure that budgets do not exceed approved thresholds. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate that. Once again, this is already part of the IT contract budget Mike talked about earlier, part of the 1.1 million. So, any question for Mike, team? Looking to my left, and I look to my right. No questions, so I'll make a motion here. I move to authorize the mayor to sign the consultant service agreement with CC Kearney, LLC, subject to final term and condition acceptable to the IT director and city attorney, and to ratify past action consistently with this motion. So we had a motion to second. Any discussion, team? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? Let the record show unanimous pass.
Great,
Thank
thank
you,
you.
Mike. Appreciate that. Let's move on to item D. We have an ordinance amendment. Samantha Doyle. Where is Samantha? This is relating to deferred compensation, huh? Okay.
Yes. Good evening, Council. Tammy White, City Attorney. I just wanted to take an opportunity to introduce you to Samantha Doyle. She's one of the new attorneys in our office. She started with us actually back in December, but this is her first time appearing before you. You might remember Adam Long. He left us for private practice. After a long recruitment process, we were able to convince Samantha to come work with us, and she has prior experience working with our state legislature down in Olympia. So this is her first ordinance before you, but wanted to at least put a name to a face and introduce her to you.
You can try to prep her all you want, but it's not going to help her, okay? All right, Samantha, what do you have for us?
Good afternoon. Thank you, Tammy, for the introduction. I'm Samantha Doyle, Assistant City Attorney. Before you is the proposed housekeeping ordinance regarding the organizational requirements of the Deferred Compensation Plan Committee. The City Council established the committee in 1982 to oversee the Deferred Compensation Plan. This plan allows participating employees to invest deferred compensation to their future retirement income and other deferred benefits. The committee is staffed by city employees, and they're responsible for selecting investment plan options for employees to choose from and negotiate the terms of such options, among other administrative tasks. You may recall the most recent housekeeping ordinance related to this committee was last June, and the current proposed ordinance additionally cleans up and clarifies that since the committee is not an agency, board, commission, or committee whose members are appointed by the mayor and then confirmed by City Council, it is not subject to the requirements within Chapter 250 of the Kent City Code for appointive committees. So by removing the language referencing Chapter 250, it then clarifies that it is not an appointive committee. Finally, this ordinance outlines the duties of the committee secretary, and this position is held by the Director of Human Resources. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Do you have how many options do they have in their they can choose from? Do you know?
You know, I am not aware of how many options they currently have. Tammy may be aware. Do you know how many options they currently have for the deferred compensation plan?
I do not.
Okay.
There's a lot of options.
Quite a few.
Yeah,
Okay.
employees can go in and select their benefits. HR might have more information on
That's
this.
okay. I'm good. All right. Team, you do? Oh, okay. We're good. Thank you. I'm good. Any question for Samantha? You guys gonna let off easy like that? Okay. All right. I'll make the motion. I move to adopt ordinance number 4513, amending section 2.80.020 of the Kent City Code to update the city code provisions concerning the organizational structure of the Deferred Compensation Plan Committee. Motion is second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Let the record show unanimous pass. Samantha, welcome on the team.
Thank you so much.
All righty. Okay, we can move on to economic development and Chair Larman.
Thank you, Chair. Tonight, we have Kristen Holdsworth, who's going to bring us an item for action. It's the 2021 King County Countywide Planning Policy Amendments Resolution.
Good evening, Council. Tammy stole my thunder in getting to introduce a new employee. I am here to introduce Deja Mitchell. She may look familiar. She's been with the city for almost 2 years in our current planning group. As part of the biennium budget, we had a temp position that was converted for a permanent position in Long Range, and Deja is the lucky recipient of filling that position. Lindsay was on loan to Long Range for a little bit. She's back in current planning, but Deja is now a permanent Long Range planner in our city, and so this is a great example of investment in our staff and just ability to retain and continue training. So Deja actually gets to be the lucky recipient of presenting tonight.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I am Deja Mitchell. As Kristen said, I am the long-range planner here. So I'm here to ask Council to ratify a resolution for amendments to the 2021 countywide planning policies. So just a little bit of an overview about the CPPs, or the countywide planning policies. They were initially adopted in the 1990s and are periodically updated. And this inverted triangle you see here is our growth planning framework in Washington. And the growth goals flow from top to bottom. So you have state at the very, very top, and then cities at the very bottom, and then you have some jurisdictions and counties in between. So the last substantial update was in 2021, and some minor amendments have happened annually. So the purpose of tonight's meeting is to discuss some amendments that the Growth Management Planning Council recognized needed more time and refinement to figure out. So just a summary of the amendments that I'll be going through today. So there are 3 of them. The first one is changes to the City of Maple Valley's urban growth area boundary, or the UGA. The second one is changes to requirements for countywide centers. And the third is changes to the county's 4-to-1 policy in regards to urban growth, area expansion, and rural area preservation. So our first change here is a change to the Maple Valley's northern edge. So there are 3 parcels on the northern edge that they recognize during the 2024 comprehensive plan that they wanted to move out of the UGA into their rural area, or to be designated as their rural area. So this change really only affects Maple Valley and King County. It has no effect on Kent whatsoever, just really that area there in Maple Valley. Moving on to our second change here. So we have a change with the countywide centers. So just a refinement. So currently the countywide centers say that candidates for the designation of countywide centers should have sub-area plans or sections in your comp plan. So this change essentially gets rid of that rhetoric, allowing for a little bit more flexibility. So if you want to do sub-area plan or chapters in your comp plan, you can. If you don't want to, you don't have to. So some flexibility there. Kent only has 1 candidate for a countywide center, which is Canyon Ridge. And we're looking to do that designation within the Benton Corridor Plan. So we already have plans to do it in the corridor plan, so it doesn't really affect us either. So there's no added expectations or costs for Kent, essentially. Moving on to our third one here. So our third change, or our third amendment, is to create and clarify consistency among the provisions that guide the county's 4-to-1 program. So essentially what the 4-to-1 program is it expands the UGA by preserving development in rural areas for cities. All of Kent's potential annexation area has already been annexed, and Kent's not looking to broaden their UGA boundary, nor do we have any area that's designated as rural area. So again, this also doesn't really affect Kent. So that's pretty much all the amendments I have for you today. So these ordinances were passed or adopted by King County Council December 3rd and December 10th. And they become effective March 24th and April 2nd unless cities specifically disapprove, which is why we're moving this to council agenda tonight. But again, none of these really affect Kent, so that's all I have for you today.
Great, thank you, Deja. Any questions for Deja? Okay, if I have no questions, I will read the motion. I move to adopt resolution number 2085, ratifying amendments to the King County countywide planning policies adopted by King County through ordinances 19871 and 19880. Do I have a second? Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion passes. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Councilmember Larmer. We'll move on to Parks. Chair Rochelle.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Boyce. Okay, so Parks has 2 items tonight, and Julie Paris-Gondola, Parks Director, will present both of them. Both are pretty exciting.
I know. Thank you. Good afternoon, council members. Good to see you. It's been a while, I feel like, since I've been up at council. I am happy to say I'm finally here today to talk about the Riverbend restaurant lease. Yay! So I'll talk more about that. First, before I get started on lease term details, I did just want to do a quick how'd we do in 2024 so you know kind of where we're starting and where we're ending. As you can see, 2024 on this kind of history of profit and loss is the far right hand. It's got the orange there. So we're estimated. We're still working on final year-end closeout. So just to put a caveat there, but this is pretty close to accurate. Looks like we're going to be making almost a $700,000 profit this year, which is pretty amazing. And you can see now we've got the strong trend. Sometimes it depends if we reinvest that into the course or not, which is why you'll see some fluctuation. So I do have Eric Heinrichs, who is our golf manager, in the audience today. So Eric, wave your hand. I know you would love that. He's obviously, I can stand up here and say they're, but it's Eric and the team that put together so much hard work on making sure that continues to stay successful. So per city policy, technically we should have 16% in our fund, at the golf fund, to cover reserves or, catastrophic things. And that is an estimation of around $520,000. We have a separate cash reserve that's actually separate from fund balance that we built. And that is already at $500,000. And so currently estimated fund balance for 24 rolling into 25 is almost $2 million at 1.9. So pretty proud of the team, very successful. And that, and honestly, 2024, we had the loss of the restaurant revenue. And so this is pretty much primarily mostly just golf. So moving in, before I get on lease terms, I just wanted to remind just the philosophy of how I look at it when I approach lease negotiations, especially at the restaurant, because it's very different than just going to find a restaurant space at like Kent Station or a standalone, because you have a little bit more control a little bit. In our case, we consider us pretty integrated. So we're both legally landlords, but we're also partners out there because their success is contingent on ours and vice versa. So we have an integrated customer base. So it's very different. We have built-in steady footprint that will help them as well as help us. We have a shared brand experience. You'll see later the golf course is going to brand the new restaurant as Riverbend Bar and Grill. So we're really excited about that. So it's definitely connecting to the actual golf course. Policy alignment and oversight, operating out of a city-owned facility, you got to follow city-owned rules and obviously come to city councils and things like that. Access to amenities and events and things. We do require anybody that at the restaurant, they have to sponsor and not sponsor, but cater and provide food and beverage for our tournaments and all the things we have out there. And then, of course, again, our long-term success is linked directly together. And so what we did is the first thing, it's been a while, when we were doing Half Line back in the day, that was a little different. We had a long gap there. And the market was a little different, so we wanted to reconfirm the market. We went out at the time, we went out in June of 24. That's when we did this kind of search starting. You'll see these are all the general locations we looked at for comps comparables. And I looked anywhere from restaurant space to retail space to office, just to get a nice kind of understanding of where we're at. Highs and lows, it depends. Most of it's triple net leases. And so the average of all of that is about $26.85 a square foot. Riverbend does pay as part of the city facilities. We have the square footage fee we charge that does get charged to the golf fund. So obviously my first priority is paying that, making sure we have enough revenue to cover that. Anything after that goes directly in as a profit for us. So you'll see we did a final lease rate of $26.41. So that basically puts the rent annual lease at about $94,500 annually. They then have to pay for their utilities, which we'll talk about. That averages around $36,000, and they do have to pay 12.84% leasehold tax. So all of that together is what they're paying monthly. What we did is issue the RFP. That's just a cover on the right there. It was a pretty extensive RFP. We did that in July 15th of 24. Proposals were due on August 30th. We really shopped it around. We had some direct inquiries. People, the minute they knew we had some space, were calling, but we had to finish a legal process before we could officially move on this one, which is why it held so long. ECD was great and gave us the email list of every restaurant in Kent to see if we could maybe see if anybody wanted a second location. We did social media posts on both City of Kent and our Facebook page at Kent Parks. We put it in both the mayor's newsletters and the parks newsletters. We posted on commercial property sites, and of course emails to our partners, the Kent Chamber and the Kent Downtown Partnership. And what that resulted is 5 viable proposals, which is great. One it just didn't meet the standards of what we were expecting to see, so I'd say 5 pretty reasonable ones to consider. We did a review of the proposals, brought in the top 2 restaurants to begin having a conversation with. There was a 4-person review team. That was our chief administrative officer, myself, the parks director, Eric, golf manager, and then we brought in a member of the men's club to begin and also have a conversation. We explored options with both the top 2, but ultimately chose to begin final negotiations with Corey Mason. Corey can't be here today because I was trying to squeeze this in wherever I could, so apologies on that, but we will hopefully definitely see you if you approve this tonight at the grand opening, so we'll see you there. So Corey, let me talk a little more about who the owner is. Corey Mason, he's the sole owner of 3 existing restaurants currently, so very experienced restaurant guy. They're all separate LLCs, so he owns Divine Whiskey and Wine in Maple Valley, Falls City Bar and Grill in Falls City, and then Dino's Pub in Renton. We did get, of course, 3 years of tax returns. Legal department supported us on this and really looked at all their business license stuff, any kind of arrears, any issues with the state, all that good stuff, no red flags. And for this new restaurant here at Riverbend, he did establish a new LLC, so smart on this one. And he is going to be again operating as Riverbend Bar and Grill, so that is going to be the name of the new restaurant. We have a full business plan on here, which will come into play a little bit later when I talk. But he did hire a business manager special for this location, which we really like. His name's Matt Steele. He's obviously a men's club as well and does a lot of playing golf. So it's been a great addition to be able to have the business person with the restaurateur because they're determined to make this one work. So on the lease terms, we've been negotiating for several months. So we are ahead on some things here. And the first thing we wanted to do, because our goal is to try and get something open before active peak season golf starts, and we're getting into that category right now. So we did push on this one to move forward. So the way that we tentatively agreed currently, subject to council approval, is 1 month of full rent abatement right in the first month. So basically the first month they're open, let's get you started. And then what we did is additional discounted rent months, which is a little different. The prior tenant, we did 3 months of rent abatement. This one, we're kind of spreading it out a little bit more. And what this means is you'll see here, year 1, we have discounted months. We have 3 discounted months. If you look at Exhibit D, a little hard to read, but when they did the business plan, what they were looking at was cash flow analysis. And we know that during the peak season, we can provide enough support for the restaurant to just manage on their own. It's the shoulders, the non-peaks, they need to really bring in that outside audience. And so what this does is give them a little bit of a graduated scale to begin to build that external base while they still got this strong. So if you look at the schedule that's on Exhibit D, all of their discounts are not in the summer months. They're in those shoulder months as they're moving forward. And the other thing that it does is rather than just, we don't get any revenues, if we're doing a full abatement or something, this allows us each to have better cash flow in alignment. And so you see that it gradually just decreases and decreases, and then we're just pretty much back to normal year 3. To confirm we're still getting more the first year, which I'll share later, than we got even prior. So I don't want people to think the discounting is like ruining the budget or anything. That's not the case, and I'll show that here in a little bit. Also, as part of the lease, we did build in a CPI inflator of a minimum 2% per year. It can go up, but we do have that capped at 4%. So depending on CPI, so it always grows annually with the CPI inflation. Utilities I discussed before, this is separate than the lease amount paid. They have to pay for utility consumption. So we've done some work since the prior tenant was in there and have done some separate sub-metering out there. We're not fully finished yet, but we have several invoices that'll come. It's just a straight pass-through. So gas is on its own meter now, water and sewer. And so basically what they use, that's what they're paying. And so we just pass that through right directly to them. Then we have a few areas that are still on a formula because it's too integrated with the whole rest of the restaurant. That's electric, and right now we agreed to a 40%. They're in charge for 40%, and that's based on past usage audits. What we agreed with them is we would review it in 6 months and see if we're good on the splits, and we'll modify accordingly. Storm drainage, they are responsible for 35% of storm drainage, and that was based on a whole previous study that we did. And then garbage, they're responsible. We share a garbage receptacle, so that's at 50%. We split that. And then they're on the hook for their own phone and cable and all that good stuff. So on average, utilities are averaging around 30 to 40%. The lease term, the first term is 10 years, so that starts, obviously, if council approves tonight in 2025, ends in 2034. Then they have 2 options to extend for another 5 years. And then you'll see on that second note there, every time they choose to do an option, we're redoing the market study. So at year 2034, I'm going to be studying to see what market rate is doing, and we'll discuss that when we do the option to renew on the second term. So just always making sure we're keeping ahead of the market. We did authorize them early access to begin doing some initial tenant work there, get some equipment going. We had them sign a formal city early access agreement. They did provide their full insurance requirement per our risk department. They put down a $10,000 security deposit. No lease payment while they're in there because, of course, they're not open, but they are paying for their utilities because that's on them. That's not something we should cover. And then once the lease is signed, if council approves it tonight, the early access agreement is terminated, and then it just goes straight to the lease terms that you see in your packet tonight. And then no major tenant improvements right now. They are removing some booths right in the windows. They want to open up those doors, that face. So they did a few things like that. They're doing some painting. No major walls or major tenant. They want to actually get in there and live in the space for a little while and then propose improvements later. You'll see in the agreement, they have to get those approved. They can't just do them. They have to get it approved by the city, and so we'll see that more. So right now, they're going to do more of a turnkey on that and get it open so we can have it open. So impacts to the golf fund, this just gives you an example. Prior tenant lease, we got $36,300, and even with discounting, we're still at $44,460 that first month trying. And again, year one is a little bit harder to look at because we're not even starting until April, May, and then it continues on from there for the full lease term. That'll go into the golf fund. So next steps, the project grand opening is obviously contingent upon your approval tonight. And then they are still working towards their liquor cannabis license in their health department. Got good indications. They've already been out there inspecting and things, all of which are pending. So we're hoping for late April, early May. Fingers crossed, all goes well there. Once that happens, of course, we're going to look once you approve, and then it goes through. And just so you know, this is going on consent tonight as well. We did get the okay from Council President Kaur to move this to consent, only because of timing. For their licenses, they need signed lease agreements and things, so we have to kind of move that forward. And so once we do that, we're just going to celebrate and announce and plan the grand opening and have all a good time. So happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you so much for your presentation, Julie. This has been quite the journey.
Yeah.
And great job to you and the legal team. I read through the entire lease. I've read some restaurant leases before, and this is
Yes, Logan was great. It's been
very thorough. So I know there's lessons learned as well.
There is, and we did add a few things to the lease. Not that we can do much with the law when it comes to certain things, but we did what we could within the parameters.
Councilmember Troutner, do you have a question?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Super excited for this. You said they are not making a lot of changes inside, because I know when you came in when it was Half-Line before, they had that big space there that you could kind of have,
yes.
which is kind of nice for if, like, private parties or small groups want to have that. That'll remain.
That's going to stay. Yeah.
Very cool.
Right?
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks.
Go ahead.
Thank you. I'm really excited about this here, and I do know the owner.
You know.
I go to Divine at least twice a week.
Oh, all right.
They serve some good
We need to
food.
switch to Riverbend,
And if they
please.
serve what they serve at Divine, they serve there, we're gonna be in really good shape. So they are really top-notch people. The employees, they just love their leaders in there. It's just, this is a big win for us.
That's good to know.
We
Thank you.
might finally got it right, so.
I didn't even know that. I could have used that in my presentation. Thank you, Councilmember Boyce.
Yeah, that's super encouraging.
Yes.
Are there any other questions? No? Okay.
Brenda?
Oh, go ahead, Councilmember.
When you were talking about removing booths, was it the booths outside of those sliding
Oh, the
doors?
interior, the prior tenant chose to put booths right up on those sliding windows for whatever reason,
Okay.
probably for more space. They want to open that up, last we heard, and try and open those in the summer. That way you've got nice breezeway. But again, they're still working through it all. They're in there now trying to assess the landscape and figure out their next steps.
Okay. And we have an excellent review for Divine. Have you been to the Fall City or Dino's location?
I haven't, but I know Eric has. He's went out and gone in.
Been Dino once.
Thank you.
Any other questions or restaurant reviews?
Excuse me.
Actually, I did do a little sleuthing, and they have good Google reviews for their food.
Okay, well, there we go.
Good job.
All right.
Thank you, guys.
There you go.
Okay, I will read the motion. I move to authorize the mayor to sign the lease agreement with Mason Ka LLC DBA Riverbend Bar and Grill and sign all necessary additional documents, including subsequent renewal terms authorized by the lease agreement, subject to final terms and conditions acceptable to the Parks Director and City Attorney.
Second?
All right, I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion passes.
Awesome, thank you. I will keep you guys posted on when the official date is, so thank you so much. Because there will be an opening, so you'll all be invited.
Okay. All right, on to your next topic.
Yes.
Thank you, Councilmember Michelle. We're gonna.
Wait, hold on.
Oh, you got one more?
Julie
I'm
has one
sorry.
more.
I'm sorry. Please.
Are you ready?
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. I'm here tonight. We're here to discuss the Athenian Group's Phase 2 contract in the amount of $2,406,480. And that's really to continue leading and managing the city's space planning efforts. As you all know, this is a major multi-year project that will result in more efficient consolidated municipal footprint. It includes the remodel of the newly purchased Administrative Services Building, the Centennial Center, and the Annex, and the eventual relocation of City Hall and Centennial staff to that new Administrative Services Building, and then, of course, our Kent Police Headquarters and City Council Chambers relocating to Centennial and the Annex. And you've actually already seen the work in progress. Over the past 4 months, Athenian has been engaged in a smaller Phase 1 contract. They've worked closely with staff across departments, conducted site visits and interviews, evaluated operational and space needs, and then developed a real clear path forward. Many of you also had the opportunity to engage with the Athenian team directly and received a detailed update on work to date as well as work coming at the March 7th council retreat. What we're asking for tonight is not really a new direction. It's actually a continuation of the project that you are already aware of. We are ready to move from planning to execution. And so Phase 2 of the contract will focus on exactly that, making this vision a reality. And so they'll be managing all the programming, the space design, coordination for both buildings, define staff adjacencies and operational groupings, and ensure how each department aligns. What you saw in the stacking and blocking is really just the first step. We've got to actually work with architects and engineers now and get all the spaces actually really built in those different shapes. They are also supporting procurement and vendor selections, including the architect and engineer, the GCCM, which is what we're doing on this project, developing transition and move strategies, furniture, technology, all the change management efforts. They oversee with us budget tracking and all that good stuff to make sure we don't go over our numbers, and of course coordinating across all partners, internal and external. The project is highly complex. I can't even stress enough. There will be impacts to every single city department as well as the city council. All this work is really critical to moving the complex project forward and in a way that's really strategic, coordinated, and efficient, because this entire time we need to maintain city operations and continuity. Phase 2 scope is expected to span 19 months with the draft project timeline putting us into fall of 2027. This contract keeps Athenian engaged during the entire process process with all the high impact areas from early design through the move-in. And then I really just want to emphasize, which I have before, it's not really just about the construction and logistics. It's really about transformation of how we do business and how we work together and how we serve, and then also how we future-proof for future growth in all areas. Athenian brings that experience, structure, and leadership that we need to deliver on that. They have led similar projects across the country, including some of the largest municipalities in the United States. Their work is strategic, people-focused, and grounded in public sector expertise. They are a minority and women-owned business, one of the largest in Houston, and I can confidently say that they've already made a very positive impact with all of our staff team, and there's a lot of faith with them as well. Their continued involvement will really help us keep the momentum going because we got a real fast pace, on this project. So, and then you have everything else. There definitely is a lot more to the scope and in your packet. And with that, I respectfully request your approval of Phase 2 contract with Athenian Group, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. All right, council members, we heard a lot about this at the council retreat, but do you have any additional questions for Julie?
So just clarifying, this takes them through pretty much the end of the move. Like,
Yes.
That's the whole way. Okay.
Any other questions? Okay, I will read the motion. I move to authorize the mayor to sign a consultant services agreement with Athenian Group LLC for Phase 2 of the Civic Campus Relocation Project.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion passes.
Thank you.
All right, back to you.
Thank
Mr.
you,
Chair.
Councilmember Michelle. We'll move on to public safety, and I had the opportunity to be the chair of the public safety. So we have an ordinance that we're going to be talking about, and Commander O'Reilly, is he here? And Sarah? Oh, all right. I'm sorry, I should say Sarah Watson. Here we go.
All right. Thank you, Councilmember Boyce. For those who don't know me, my name is Sarah Watson. I'm Chief Prosecuting Attorney for the City of Kent. I'm here to talk to you today about the Stay Out of Drug Areas ordinance that's being proposed. Kind of want to explain why we're here, right? What this ordinance is not, and then what it is, and then how it works, really. This ordinance is really, I think, part of a larger solution. And to what problem, right? Drug activity in Kent has nearly doubled since 2022. Kent Police Department has responded to over 1,000 drug overdoses in that same time. And these incidents, and you'll hear from Commander O'Reilly soon, have been shown to be concentrated really in specific areas within our city. This isn't something that's widespread everywhere. It is concentrated. And essentially public drug users, or people who use their drugs in public, are attracting drug dealers and they're attracting other criminals. So our current system, the way that we're operating right now, is essentially allowing people to be preyed upon, users and non-users alike. So what is it not? This ordinance does not apply to all addicts. It does not apply to all criminal defendants. It is not simply an attempt to punish a drug addict for being in a particular place at a particular time. I want to be very clear about that. It does not just, and it doesn't cut access for anybody for things like housing, for treatment, for job opportunities, for access to their lawyer, to the court, none of that. So what is it? It's a tool to assist law enforcement in decreasing unlawful activity. It's going to be a tool to assist the court in improving offender accountability. And it's going to operate similar to things that we already have in place. So a few years back, we passed a Stay Out of Areas of Racing ordinance, right? That applies to particular defendants who have engaged in particular behavior, and the court, to keep that from happening again in the future, is going to prohibit them from being in that area. Same thing, we have a Stay Out of Areas of Prostitution ordinance on our books as well. Same thing, for individuals who are engaged in prostitution, they're going to be restricted from particular areas of our city. We also have, DUI offenders. It's commonplace for the court, if you're charged or convicted of a DUI, to impose abstinence conditions. And along with that, they're going to prohibit you from going into bars, taverns, or places where liquor is the primary purpose, right? Because they're trying to avoid that behavior from repeating itself. So this is sort of in that same vein, and I think it's best to sort of think of it that way. It's a very narrow tool designed to target a very specific population. And again, at the court's discretion, there's nothing that says they have to use this tool. It's just one tool for them to use. based on their discretion, based on the specific circumstances of that defendant in that case. So what does it do? It's going to establish 3 stay out of drug area zones within the city, and Commander O'Reilly is going to talk about how those were formulated and decided upon. It gives the court the ability to order those specific defendants to stay out of those zones. A violation of the order will be a criminal offense. It's a gross misdemeanor, so it will carry a maximum penalty of a year in jail and a $5,000 fine. There is a mandatory minimum provision in there that's going to be on page 5 of the proposed ordinance. I can go through those specifics if you want me to, but I think they're pretty straightforward. So when can the court issue one of these orders? It's going to be in 2 specific circumstances. The person either needs to be charged or convicted of a drug offense, or there needs to be a nexus between the offense that they're charged or convicted of and their illegal drug use. So if there's evidence in the record that there's a nexus between the 2, then the court could impose a SOTA order in those.
Could you repeat that one more time? You lost me. Just repeat what you just said, that last part.
So it could be used in 2 circumstances. One, you're going to be charged with a drug offense. The other is if there's a nexus between the crime that they're being charged or convicted of and their illegal drug use.
Okay.
And it's going to have to be something that's in the record. So something in the police report, something that came out of the conduct. Did their illegal drug use lead them to commit the offense? Did the pursuit of their drug use lead them to commit the offense? And so it's going to have to be documented. The judge is going to have to have facts that they can rely on in order to issue it in that circumstance. And so, again, what is the order? It's going to prohibit people from 3 specific zones. When the order is issued as a pretrial condition of release, it operates as all the orders that we have now. So it'll be sort of in perpetuity until that case gets resolved. If it's imposed as a condition of somebody's sentence, the maximum term is going to be 2 years on these orders. And anytime the court is going to consider imposing these, there's certain considerations that they're going to have to take into account. They're going to have to take into consideration where the defendant lives. They'll have to take into consideration where the defendant works and where they receive services. And the ordinance is pretty broad on that. It just says services. So if they have a legitimate service need at a service provider in one of these zones, the court's going to have to take that into consideration. And then the court can allow exceptions based on those same reasons. So the court can say, yeah, I'm going to impose this SOTA zone or the SOTA order. I understand that you go to treatment in this zone. That's fine. You go there Tuesdays, Thursdays from 5 to 6. As long as you're going in and out, not a problem. And they'll be able to delineate that into the order. And then the orders can also be modified and terminated by the court at any time. So there's a process in the ordinance that allows the court to set a hearing, hear from the defendant, their defense attorney, and any evidence that they want to propose to the court. And then the court can make that decision whether to modify it or terminate it, really at any point in the process. I think it's also important to point out that it will never be a violation for somebody to use public transportation to go through these zones.
What about private transportation? Like if they're...
The way that it's proposed
They
right
argue
now
that they were
is for
passing through or...
public transportation.
Okay.
Only. Yeah.
Okay.
You want to take question now before
I
we
can
bring
take
Commander
questions now
O'Reilly?
or wait for Commander O'Reilly to explain the zones, whatever.
Let's maybe a couple questions for you, then we'll bring them up. I'll let you go first, Tony. Go ahead.
Thank you. Just a question. So you talked about 2 incidences where they could be one
Right.
being charged with something, the other.
I can't hear you, Tony.
Oh, I'm sorry. The 2 different things that they, if they're charged with something or if they're committing a crime where they're charged, does trespassing fall into that if they're in a zone where someone has trespassed them from their business? Does that, how does that
I would
fall
say
into
it
that?
theoretically could. So it's not going to fall into that first prong because trespassing is not a drug offense in and of itself. If they are, I would say, trespassing and using an illegal drug at the same time, then there will be a nexus.
Okay.
The court could impose that order.
Thank you.
I'll let you go first. Go ahead.
Yeah, so just point of clarity. So if they live within one of these zones, because I'm guessing, looking at the map, there's some apartment complexes and some different housing. that will be taken into consideration when you're saying that the court has
Yeah,
discretion
so
to?
anytime the court puts together an order, they have wide discretion to curtail it or make modifications and exceptions as necessary. We see them all the time, really, with no contact orders. The common example is, defendant and alleged victim live in the same apartment complex. So if you impose a standard order, you would automatically have a foot restriction. I would imagine that the judge could take a similar approach and say, if you're at home, you're not going to be in violation of this order.
Okay.
I have a couple of questions, Sarah. What other city have this here in place, do you know?
That I'm aware of right now, the city of Auburn and city of Seattle have them. If there's others, I'm not aware of them.
Okay, Auburn close enough. Do you have any feedback how that working or not working in the city of Auburn?
I haven't received any direct feedback.
That's okay. So you say that the judge, they have the will to do or not do, right? So are they really going to, if somebody commit these crimes over and over, are they really going to put them in jail?
I mean, you're asking me to tell the future, Councilmember.
Well, that is a plan, I guess, but they do have the option of doing it or not doing it, I guess what you're saying.
Yeah. Yep, it's their discretion.
Any question down there? Let's bring Commander O'Reilly up, then we may have more questions. Thank you, sir.
All right. I think I can just click on here. Okay, great. Thanks for the opportunity to be able to speak. Commander O'Reilly with the Community Services Unit. You guys know I have the Neighborhood Response Team and Special Operations Unit as well. So, all right. I'll click away and get started here. As you all know, you've heard the chief speak and a number of us speak from our neighborhood response team and our patrol division and such. We're a data-driven agency. We don't just automatically sort of nilly-willy pick stuff. We have scarce resources at our department, so we believe it's important to deploy our resources in a meaningful and efficient way. In this case, we looked at obviously drug crimes. And we looked at other situations where we often see around drug crime areas, such as overdoses, drug overdoses, trespass and shoplifting or theft situations where an addict or a drug user might need to raise money in order to purchase their drugs. And we indicated welfare checks here as well. And more to follow on that. It's kind of a little bit of a wider area with those, but I think it's meaningful in how the data is presented. So as Prosecutor Watson has described, we have the three areas, and you guys have them on your maps already, but it's Smith to 259th, 3rd Avenue to Central Avenue for the downtown area. Meeker is basically from 167 down to Russell Road and then from Smith to Kent Des Moines Road. And let's see if this works here. Oh yeah, great. And the last one is the area up, we call it 104th and 240th area, but it's literally from 100th Avenue up to 112th and then from 236th to 244th. And so we started off with these are just drug cases throughout the city over the last few years. You can see where in 2022 it was 73 cases. And remember, the laws were a little bit different back then. So different number, but they've increased each year. 236 in 2023, 445 in 2024. And just in the first 2 weeks of January, we had 23. So if I did the O'Reilly Irish St. Patrick's Day math correctly, that's we're on pace for 552 for this year, if it continues at this rate. So those are just drug cases. Now, these are drug cases with specific areas, these specific areas in mind. So if you look, you can start to see the cluster. Actually, we'll go back it up a little bit. You can kind of start to see the clusters here. So you have this area right here where my mouse is at. That would be sort of that Meeker area. This would be the downtown area. And then over here would be the 104th and 240th area. You can see the same kind of clustering there. These are drug cases specifically in these areas. When it's pink and red and then yellow, it's burning the brightest. Those are the most instances where we're seeing those sorts of things. And that's how we started to kind of come up with these areas, right? We didn't pick the areas first. We let the numbers lead us to these areas. Drug arrests or charges. So, right, we might have one case, but there could be multiple charges in a case. So you'll see the numbers could be different or less. 231, but you can just look. Basically, the numbers were rising each year, and we're on pace for 696 potential total charges for this year. Again, you can see, you can see this area, that cluster, the downtown cluster, and then the East Hill cluster, same thing. This is just with regard to the soda areas, and you can see the clusters. It's just another way of looking at it. Specific charges in those areas alone were 197 charges in the downtown. Meeker had 183 charges over this time, and then 104th and 240th had 95 charges. Overdose data. We felt it was important to recognize overdoses. People who are using drugs sometimes overdose, and this is over the last few years again, but this is just mainly specific to those soda areas. We had 151 in the downtown area, in the Meeker area, 135, 104th and 240th, we had 120. And you can see again, same cluster as the drug cases and the drug charges and overdoses, same 3 areas in the city. Trespassing, we often see it in areas where people are committing crimes with drug use and things like that, and they're either through shoplifting. You'll see a shoplifting and trespassing kind of comparison. Oftentimes when people are arrested for shoplifting or contacted, they're also issued, or it's an or it could be both, right? And these are just the soda areas alone. Downtown, 728. You can see the Meeker area has 1,003 over the last few years, and the East Hill area, 693. So you can see, we talked about the burning thing here. That means a whole lot, right? That's the Target and Home Depot shopping area. Sort of that area, lots of shops and things like that. There's a lot of trespasses that are issued in those areas due to stores and things like that. But we don't have a drug nexus in that area. If we did, we might be considering another zone, right? But we don't. So you'll probably see the same thing once we get to shoplifting. So now look at this one, you go, hey, O'Reilly, there's not as many dots on this one. And so what you got to remember here is these are for shoplifts. So it's going to be commercial businesses. So a trespass could occur at a lot of different places, right? In a park, different locations, the 100 block of this area and such. It could be from somebody's apartment complex and things like that. And each of those dots represents a business, right? So one dot could represent 10 shoplifts. So if you follow me there, you can see right over, well, right over in the Meeker area, it's kind of started highlighting pink there, and obviously the Home Depot Target area, it's really burning bright. But no drug nexus, so we're not looking at that area. We might look at that area for a shoplifting emphasis and blitz in partnership with our commercial partners up there, and we have, but not for this. And then this is all the maps of those instances combined, just sort of overlapping all of them, and you can kind of see those 3 cluster concentrations again. And this just gives you another visual to look at. Again, welfare checks. This represents all the welfare checks in the city. Not all welfare checks are drug related. Some are, hey, I haven't heard from my grandma. I'm out of state. Can you go check? There's a lot of different things. But if you notice in each of those 3 areas, they're burning pretty bright here. And then, you can see the East Hill without me pointing at it. So there's an increased check on that. You might have seen it as you drive through the downtown area. Somebody's bent over at the waist, arms dangling. They're not moving, but they're not awake, but they appear to be high on something, and we get welfare checks on that. It might be multiple callers for one person. Obviously, so it's something to consider. But, it's kind of a shotgun approach because there's so many welfare checks in the city, but you can tell there that there is an increase. Any questions based on that?
Yeah,
Could I have one more moment? So just yesterday alone, while I was working on finishing up the PowerPoint, I was listening to the radio as I do each day, and I heard different calls come out throughout the day. Overdose, check for drug activity. We have a reporting party in this room who called about drug activity over at Holy Spirit Parish yesterday, and it ended up getting to 1 drug arrest for possession and use. Person was standing in a garden bed with a meth pipe. Person had meth and baggies of fentanyl. The person admitted to, yep, this is fentanyl and meth in the bag. And oh, by the way, I just bought it. That's why it hasn't been used yet. Where'd you buy it? Oh, well, I bought it over in the other zone, on the Meeker zone area is where he bought it at. And so, there's a number of other ones yesterday. We had an overdose in the alley in between Pier Kent and Kent Downtown Partnership. That person was saved with Narcan from a citizen, could have been a Pier employee, I'm not sure. We had one up at 104th and 240th. The person had actually called in for an unwanted subject, but when I called the business owner today, he owns a laundromat up in the 104th, 240th area, and he says, yeah, it's a huge problem for me and my business. They'll come in, they'll take over my bathroom, and they'll use drugs. I can't get them out, and he had a problem. I talked to the owner of, More Than Rocks, and she was actually calling in a complaint because somebody was essentially passed out at Sweet Themes Bakery, who was closed yesterday. And I said, okay, well, can you give me some more details on this? And she goes, well, if you're asking me if it's drug related, I believe it. And she says that this is a problem. It's all the time. I always find foil and things like that. So just a little anecdotal stuff of just talking to people from those areas who have businesses in those areas and things like that. Just to give you a little anecdotal piece at that to the end. I kind of feel like we're on the right place here just based on the numbers and then some of the citizens giving us some feedback as well when we follow up with them.
Hey, before we go, Council President Core, I'm going to give you an opportunity if you want to have something to say.
Thank you, Councilmember Boyce. I think it's a great idea. I think looking at some of the areas, but I do have a question, Commander O'Reilly, about, I guess, the shoplifting part. How does this help with that? Since those areas are not part of the SODA.
So when we say shoplift, people in stores, going into stores, and in there, people don't always just pay money when they purchase
Target,
drugs.
Home Depot, or like
if you're talking
Trader
about
Joe's, they're not part of the SODA.
No, and
Yeah.
and the reason why is because there's no drug nexus up in that area, right? So obviously good grounds for shoplifting emphasis in partnership with our stores up there, which we do already. But if there was a drug nexus up in that area, we would certainly probably be considering a fourth zone.
If I could add just sort of two things, is that really, you want to limit this to areas where there really is a problem, right? If you expanded the zones or had them everywhere, it would dilute the impact, right? So we're really trying to make this an impactful tool. The other thing that I wanted to add is that the ordinance contemplates, I think you'll see it on page 6 of the proposed ordinance, it also contemplates that the police department is going to continue to do these heat maps. They're going to continue to see where the problem areas are, and we can always come back to council and say, hey, this zone's not working for us anymore. Now we've got this problem here, and we can adjust it over time based on the need.
Okay. And you might have stated, Commander Riley, so are these zones, are they going to be mapped? There's any things that this is a SODO zone? How do we know the SODO zone is to stay out? There's gonna be a thing in the city say this is a SODO zone or what?
Well, I imagine when the person who's the most important person who needs to know, when they receive it in court, I'm guessing they'll be very clear to them. I'm guessing they'll probably be issued a map. Here's the description of the area. It'll probably be very clear and apparent. In some of our other areas, we have had stay out of areas of racing. We have had soap order signs in the past. But I don't know what our plans are for that right now.
Signage is not contemplated for this, and the reason is because the order is attached to an individual. There's no purpose served by putting that signage out there. The reason that you have the signage in our racing areas is to alert somebody that they're entering into a race area. And the reason that you want to alert folks, I mean, there's a public safety component, but also because our ordinance, we have an ordinance for attending a race event. Part of that is you need to prove that person had knowledge that they were attending or supporting a race event. And so if that person is on notice when they travel into a race area, they should be on extra notice that a race might break out, right? So there's no need for that notice component.
Totally makes sense. Let me walk through something. So I'm a drug addict, okay? And nobody know about it, right? And then I'm walking to one of the areas here, right? And then somebody calls, say, Bill doing blah, 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 right? So then you'll come and you'll get me, and then I'll go to the court system, right? So this will be my first time in the court system, right? But I was in this area.
No.
Okay.
No. So the court can only impose this order on somebody who already has a case.
Okay. Gotta have a case. There you go.
Somebody
So that
has
one.
to have already been charged with a crime, and then it gets imposed as a condition of release.
Gotcha.
So instead of holding somebody in custody, right, we're saying, maybe this person can be released with certain conditions to try to avoid that behavior from happening in the future. So, if you have a drug case and be like, all right, Bill, you need to stay out of the drug area, right?
Yep.
And then if you get caught, that would be a new charge.
Crystal clear. Sounds good. I'm gonna start down here to my right here, and I'm gonna start with Brenda. You have any questions, concerns? Please, Councilman Fincher.
I do, and comments. So you cleared that first time, and that's when they also notify you that it's a drug area. And so you do know before you were going to be able to return there. Were businesses in the area, were they notified? I know that you said you had reports and all, and you talked to people about it. It's a problem. Were they talked to about a soda ordinance? I know I was in one meeting, but just generally were the businesses contacted?
We routinely work with the Kent Downtown Partnership, with Gayla and her team, and we attend monthly meetings with them. We've talked to them about it and things like that, if that answers your question?
Yes. So that, and through that way, the businesses are notified at their general meetings, I do imagine.
Yes, I think a number of them have been notified and may speak at some point.
And then I know sometimes, like with the traffic cameras, the fines go to help pay for other things within the department. With this, where would fines go if someone was to pay a fine? Or part of that fine money go?
There's no specific funding component of this proposed ordinance, so it would be handled the same way that any fees are assessed on a criminal charge.
And I appreciate that it's a small, concise area so that people do know. And I know it's been a problem for us, like many of the other businesses down there. We have cameras, but it also impacts people coming. So, or actually wanting to leave also. And I like the component, or I guess that question should say, so people go to the community court, our community court here in Kent with this, and at that community court, are there resources available to help?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. So right now, anytime we file a drug case, and I would imagine these would be treated the exact same way, their arraignment automatically gets set on our community court calendar. And that's something that I actually just asked Judge Franz to do a few months ago, because I think it made sense to make that initial contact in our community court. So yeah, these would be treated the same way. As long as somebody shows up, they're going to have access to a plethora of resources. I understand you were there last week, so you saw for yourself. I mean, There's housing assistance, treatment assistance, both mental health and substance use, job assistance. I think they even help folks get medical insurance, and even cell phones. I think it's really a pretty comprehensive program.
I know there are quite a few services, even for people who don't have a case. That is one of my favorite parts of this, that people will have the chance to get help. Again, they're going to have to get to the point where they want that. As we saw, there was a woman who came into the court. Well, there were a couple of people who had been or were still going through who had positive results. There were also a couple of people where they were not doing what they were supposed to do, and things were going to be continuing through the court system. But I think that this is a good move. I think that it'll hopefully get some people to be able to improve and be that carrot that they need to move on. And again, it's for a specific area. The people know where that area is. So it's not going to be the magic bullet, because they're not going to say, okay, I'm never going to use drugs again.
Sure.
But they're able to get the help, including not a replacement drug, but like Suboxone and different drugs to help them be able to get off of drugs once they so choose to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Boyd.
Thank you, council member. Yes, I was at community court with Council Member Fincher too, and they do offer a lot of assistance there. And I was talking to Commander Riley earlier before we started Community of the Whole, and the idea of how he told me is, we're trying to make these people who's using drugs in certain locations, we're trying to make them uncomfortable. So if they get picked up numerous times, maybe they'll get the idea that they have to change locations to where they buy the drugs, or they have to change their lifestyle. So, and it's not like we locking them up and imposing a felony on them. It's a gross misdemeanor, right? Just what I hear, right? So, I think it's a good idea. As long as we're not just targeting some certain people, and not only targeting certain people, but let's not pick up the wrong people. But otherwise, I think it's a good idea, and I think we should adopt it. I really do.
Okay. Thank you. To my left, Councilman Larmer, any more comments from you?
No, I mean, I support this as well. I mean, the fact that it's, they're already in court for a reason. This seems like a common sense tool that we can use and attach to the existing charges. So, yeah, I think this, and obviously it's data driven, and that makes a lot of sense. So,
Okay, thank you, Councilman Michelle.
Thank you. I have a question about two areas. We got a comment asking if we could extend the 244th one over to 248th. Can you talk about that?
First I heard of it, but certainly something we can take a look at. So just like Sarah had explained, this isn't like a forever thing, and we can certainly adjust and pivot, and we can take a look at the data.
Okay. I didn't notice anything on the map, but I will make sure that you get that comment so that you are aware of that. And then I noticed on the maps that there was a lot of activity on where 256 and Kent Kangley meet in that area. I noticed that.
So you'll also notice up on the West Hill, there's some, but we didn't feel, and this is just getting started, and so we wanted to be very meaningful and not go overboard with getting too expansive and having everywhere in Kent be sort of a soda area. I think as time goes, we can take a look and reassess, and then maybe do so. There's some areas up on the West Hill, but the numbers just didn't really support, and we didn't really exactly set this perfect threshold, but these three places, as you saw on the map, they did really pop out. And yes, I agree with you that there could be a potential for that area as well, though.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman Troutner, anything you want to add?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank all of our businesses that came here to hear about what this ordinance means and to show your support. We hear from you a lot about things that are happening in our downtown, so I really appreciate you being here. I know you can't comment during this period, but you can comment during the council meeting, or feel free to reach out to any of us with your concerns. I know some of you attended the meeting that Kent Downtown Partnership had on the Business Improvement District and have voiced your concerns, so we are hearing what you have to say. As far as businesses go, does this change how they do anything as far as, you know, if they still see something, do they report it the same way? This doesn't change how businesses interact or how they have to do anything differently.
Nope, not one bit. We want you all to watch out for each other. And if you see crime and it's occurring, call 911. If you find out that there's look like something had happened over the weekend, maybe you found some drug paraphernalia at the back of your business or things like that, you can certainly email anybody on the neighborhood response team or special operations unit or me, just to give us a heads up about that sort of thing. And like I said, we're data driven. And so if people call, it's noted, we pay attention, and it goes into our account, and it might end up on a map just like this.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so before I adopt this ordinance, Council President, any more comments you want to make before I move forward? You good? Okay, thank you.
Council President, I had one more.
Yeah, one more? I'm sorry, please.
So you will be reevaluating the data periodically. What time frame are you thinking? Is that every 6 months, every 3 months, every once a year?
Whatever my chief tells me. Is that a good enough answer?
For the chief, do you have a time period that in mind?
So no hard set time frame. We'll be evaluating. We review our crime data on a monthly basis at the chief's level. And my intent is to look at it. Historically, these numbers don't shift a lot. So I don't expect that we'll be making updates every quarter. But at least every year, we'll be looking to refresh the numbers and make sure we're accurate on where we're at.
Okay, thank you, Chief.
I realize that we may not see a whole lot, but could you at least tell us if it's noticeably going down at the 6 month period?
We can absolutely.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Another one, Councilman Boyd?
Yes, I do have an additional question. Councilperson Boyce asked earlier about, are there any other cities doing what we're trying to do now? And if so, what are the results that you heard of? Or have we heard of any results from an ordinance such as this?
For me?
For anyone who can answer it.
I answered it quite simply, no, but only because I hadn't heard anything. I'm sure I can reach out to prosecutors in both of those jurisdictions. I do have relationships and try to get some information on that.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Great job as usual, sir. Thank you. Commander Riley, thank you both. For ordinance, I'm going to read here. Make a motion. I move to adopt ordinance number 4514, enacting a new chapter 9.45 to the Kent City Code entitled Stay Out of Drug Areas. Motion and a second. Any more discussion? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Let the record show unanimous pass. Last item, Public Works, Chair Fincher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We're going to hear from Heath Brackett about Master Services Agreement for Eagle View Technologies for aerial views of the city, aerial imagery.
Council members, thank you for having me. It makes me happy to see the police using GIS analysis and their data-driven analysis and stuff. So I loved that. So I'm here to talk to you about a contract we're looking to obtain with Eagle View to obtain aerial imagery. The city obtains aerial imagery on a regular basis. We have contracted with Eagle View in the past. The reason I'm coming to you now is because we're actually looking to enter a 6-year contract with them, which would fly 3 times in 2025, 2027, and 2029. So we'd package it up as one single contract. We've never done that before. We've usually just flown as individual flights and contracted each flight individually and then contracted out with somebody else, or, going out and reanalyzing each year. So I just kind of wanted to remind you, imagery is used throughout the city, and there are a lot of free options for aerial imagery, but the quality, the accuracy of those free options is not great. This little GIF that I have here shows, free imagery that we obtained versus the 2020 imagery that we contracted for. And we get much higher resolution with that. We get much higher spatial accuracy because part of the contract that we sign with them engages them to fly and then use our survey department's survey control monuments, which they go and mark up with these big white X's so you can see them clearly in the aerial imagery. And we provide Eagle View, that exact precise location on the ground of where they are, and they rectify all of the imagery throughout the city to our control points. So it's very spatially accurate, specific just to our needs in that case. We use aerial imagery across all departments. Public Works uses it for project planning, for asset mapping. We use it also for our impervious surface calculations, for our drainage utility. Code enforcement uses our aerial imagery a lot, especially the oblique imagery that we get as part of this contract too. Parks uses it in some of their parks planning. ECD and planning uses it for change detection, over time as well. So I just kind of wanted to touch on some of the main points, the benefits of this particular contract. We propose using Eagle View, which is who we flew with in 2023. They've provided a great product. They also meet all of our needs. We get not only the planimetric straight down aerial imagery that we're used to seeing, but we also get oblique imagery for the entire city from 4 different angles. So we can see this water tower from all 4 angles, and it encompasses the entire city. That's used really heavily in code enforcement and planning. By signing a 6-year contract, we're locking in prices for these future flights, which otherwise would be an unknown cost to us. So we're locking in the same price for each individual flight. And by doing this, the annual cost, or the cost per flight of each of these flights, is actually lower than the 2023 flight that we flew. In 2023, the total cost was $41,000, and the per flight cost here will be $39,400 per flight. So we're saving a little bit of money. We're locking in that price. Along with this, we get this Eagle View Cloud subscription, which is used heavily by our planning department because that's the oblique imagery viewer for the city, and we're able to add our own city assets in there so they can still see our GIS data overlaid on top of all of that oblique imagery. That subscription's included. It used to be a separate cost, so there's a little bit of cost savings there too. And by working through one individual contract, we save a little bit of time and resources with our law department and all of the contract negotiations. So the reason I'm here to speak with you, I don't think we've ever really come to council requesting approval of an aerial imagery contract in the past, because the per flight is usually around $40,000. So this contract in total is $118,000. Which comes to just under $20,000 annually. We will get 3 flights out of it. They'll be pre-scheduled for us, so we know we have them. One thing I didn't mention in here, one of the benefits of this contract is we do have the ability to cancel if there were any unforeseen circumstances that, that happen, some sort of budget crisis or something like that. But because this is, this falls into our standard operating budget. We were already ready to, absorb these costs into our budget because we've been flying in the past. So there's no additional requests that we're making of you. We're just asking, for approval to move forward with this contract. And did you guys have any questions for me?
Any questions? I was surprised to learn how accurate they are as far as the measurements that they have to be within. So if there's nothing else, I move to authorize the mayor to sign the master services agreement with Eagle View Technologies Incorporated, subject to final terms and conditions acceptable to the Public Works Director and City Attorney.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. That is it for us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Fincher. That kind of ends our committee as a whole. I'm going to allow us to take a 5-minute break, and then we'll get started. That be okay? Yes. And let's say we start back at 5:25, okay? 5:25.
Thank you. Are you going back to the office?
Okay, good evening, everybody. We are about ready to start the second phase of our meeting tonight, and this is the workshop. We got 2 items on the workshop. The first one is the housing code update, and Kristen Holdsworth is going to start it off for us. All yours.
Good evening, council. Glad to be here tonight. It's been about a month since we last saw you with this code update work for Recode Kent. I'm joined again by our consultants. Tyler and Emily will be doing a lot of the talking for the rest of the evening. We also are joined by Jeff Arango, who's the principal on the project. He is joining us virtually, but is here to answer any humdinger questions or logistics questions that we may have as we go forward. Tonight's presentation really is focused on a lot of the code audit and analysis work that we've been doing to say, okay, we have the requirements of all of these state laws. We're looking at our code and what the requirements are to update our code, and then also looking at where the opportunities are to address either previous things that staff have identified or developers and builders have identified as barriers, or some unintended consequences. So tonight's going to be a little bit more of a wonky technical conversation. You're welcome to ask questions of any of us. I'll stand by. The first thing I wanted just to give is just a little bit of staff update. So we are actively in conversations. We've completed some internal surveys as well as external surveys with developers and builders in Kent who understand our development regulations. We're going to kick off 3 different meetings for workshops with builders and developers to talk about the development regulations that will be proposed to see if this makes sense in the real world. Tyler and Emily are going to talk about some of the modeling they're doing to test some of our assumptions, but then we're going to actually apply it to real products. We also have been really in conversations with some local developers who are saying, I have a site now and I'm working on this. Can you tell me more? And so we're doing some of those pro forma feasibilities, specifically around using ADU and DADU detached products with the idea of also creating cottage villages and other opportunities. And so staff have had a lot of conversations. We've also met internally. So Tyler and Emily are going to talk about a lot of those findings and where we're headed next. We don't in any way expect you to make final decisions tonight. Again, this is a series of conversations, and we also don't expect you to have a precise, like, this is the X amount of feet we think a setback should be. We're not asking you for that level of detail, but we want to make sure that we're generally in the right, heading in the right direction with our discussions and where your priorities are. For really the next set of, when we come to you, will be more substantial code amendments. So with that, I'll turn it over.
Thank you.
And then you do have a highlight if you use that button and hold it down.
Awesome. Good evening, Council. Tyler Quinn Smith from Framework. Good to see you all again. Thanks for the opportunity to provide an update on the Recode Kent project. We are intentionally going to be light on details this evening because we have a lot to cover. And next week, you are expecting a document that will detail all of the work that we've done in terms of the auditing, the analysis, and then the regulatory framework that we're working on for middle housing and other goals of this project. So I'm going to start by giving a few highlights of the code audit. This has been a really critical piece of the project up front that we've been doing over the last month and a half, where we're evaluating the city's existing regulations against a lot of new legislation, right? So we're going to talk a lot about tonight about the middle housing legislation that you all are aware of, HB 1110. I'm going to focus also on ADU legislation, design standards legislation. There's also a number of new bills that are making their way through the legislature this spring, which we're keeping track of, many of which could have a direct influence on this project because they may amend some of these bills we're already working to comply with. All right, so just to focus on the city's existing regulations as they are in alignment with 1110 and 1337. So those are the middle housing and ADU bills. Just right off the cuff, it's the baseline requirements of HB 1110 for units on a lot. That's drastically different than how residential development is regulated in Kent today. So we can easily say up front that that's not exactly in alignment with the state legislation. But there's a number of finer kind of nuanced topics in the bill that we're keeping track of in this audit, such as the various housing types that are defined in the legislation. Those need to be added as definitions, as use permissions in the bill. There's also, a need to tweak some of the development standards for height, for coverage, for access, for parking for each of these types that don't exist in the bill today. So a lot of what we're finding are voids in the bill that we need to address with effective regulations as we expand these new use permissions in the future. On the second set of bullets here, we're providing an overview on the code's kind of consistency with the design standards bill. This is HB 1293, really made tweaks to how cities use design review for projects working through the development pipeline. Fortunately, Kent currently only uses administrative design review, which is what this bill is really driving toward. But what we're picking up on that is not in alignment with the bill are clear and objective standards. And so the city has a handful of design standards that are codified in the Kent City Code, some of which, may not be as clear as they could be for applicants and for permit staff that are reviewing applications. There's also a handful of supplemental design guideline documents for downtown, for midway, for multifamily development. And we're finding in the audit that there's a little uncertainty as to the types of development that are subject to those guidelines, what the thresholds are for different scales of development. All of this leaves applicants and the permit review staff with a bit of uncertainty as to how to apply and evaluate projects. So we're kind of corroborating some of those findings with the discussions we've had with staff as well. Okay, on this next slide, just a few bullet points on the legislation around STEP housing, which collectively refers to emergency shelters, transitional housing, emergency housing, and permanent supportive housing. A few of these housing types exist in the code today. However, there are some changes that we've already identified that need to be made to be in alignment with this bill. For example, HB 1220, requires cities to permit emergency housing and emergency shelters in all zones that allow hotels and motels. Currently, the city of Kent defines this type of housing, but it restricts the allowance to only religious-owned properties. So that's just one example of a small kind of use permission that will have to change to align the existing code with the requirements under HB 1220. Okay, I'm now going to change gears to a really excellent staff workshop that we had in this room about a month ago. We had the opportunity to connect with not only current or permit planning staff, but folks that work in public works, development engineering, fire marshal was here, building staff, etc. We all came together and we really figured out what the biggest issues were on the horizon when it comes to middle housing development in Kent. And although we identified more issues than solutions, it was a very fruitful discussion that I'll attempt to summarize for you here. And I'll say that in addition to this discussion we had with permit staff, we set out a survey to kind of frame the discussion. A couple developers in the area had the opportunity to share some really high-level feedback for their biggest issues when it came to building multifamily residential projects in Kent. And so we were able to kind of bring that to the permit staff and say, does this really square up with the way that you're evaluating projects? And in many cases, we found perfect alignment between permit staff frustrations and frustrations among the development community. So generally speaking, historically, especially in residential neighborhoods in Kent, the permit staff are used to thinking about 1 unit per lot. But due to the intent of this bill, we need to shift our thinking to a couple units on the lot. Well, this brings a lot of complications for what needs to happen on that site. Some of the biggest issues that were flagged as kind of no-go issues, stormwater, tree retention, utilities, parking and access. These are all things that we're working together with all of these departments to put forward, a system that really addresses these concerns and not only meets the intent of the law and satisfies the baseline requirements, but make sure that it kind of aligns with the goals of the public works team, of the development engineering team, and other departments in the city. Just generally speaking, this goes for developers and the permit staff that were in attendance for that workshop, is that, the standards that we have in the code, they could always be improved for predictability and clarity. So this kind of aligns with some of the survey responses that we received, and it would really help all these permit staff feel a little bit better and more certain about the projects that they're evaluating against the code. No doubt, this workshop emphasized the need for collaboration across departments. That's the reason we met in the first place. But it really made clear that we need to continue working with them, which we intend to do. We actually have a workshop scheduled again next month. But as the project comes into its adoption phase, taking the time to train permit staff on how to use this code and make sure that people are kind of understanding it in the same way, and that will just really ensure more efficient permit processes going forward. Okay, so here I'm just going to pause and see if city council members have questions about the code audit, just kind of anything about our approach, the highlights that I've shared with you tonight, or the workshop itself. Once again, understanding that you'll have the opportunity to read a little bit more into the finer points next week.
Any question, team? So there's nothing, the workshop, you guys probably brainstorming, would it be the right terminology? I mean, there was nothing really yet came out of the workshop. Would it be an accurate statement, or?
Brainstorming is certainly one thing we were doing.
Yeah, I'd say we were unearthing challenges. So a prime example, so land use used to be the thing that got you in the door for a permit. So could you build 3 units on your lot? And normally it was, well, only if 2 of them are ADUs. That is changing starting in July. And so do this or not, there's other things like, is there utility infrastructure in place for water and sewer and all of the other things that we need? Is there enough space to fit what you want to fit on? What about if you're triggering stormwater requirements? There's all these really technical things that still remain in place, but there's also things like our stormwater requirements have these loopholes that say, well, if it's something maybe infeasible, then you may be able to discharge or do X, Y, or Z instead. And that's always assuming that it's 1 unit per lot. So now, does that question, we had a lot of questions like, does that change if there's 4 units per lot and it's not feasible to meet those stormwater requirements? Is everyone getting a loophole out? We don't think that's the intention of our environmental protection and NPDES requirements. And so it was a lot of like unearthing those items for us to research and get back to. Framework has done this for other jurisdictions. So some of it is like, what is a requirement that's like building code, fire code, NPDES that we don't have control over, versus what is a Kent-specific specialty that we've over time adopted for various good reasons that now we have to figure out what the connection is. And so that was really the point of that first workshop. We are meeting ECD to go through a lot of this with our internal managers, at least initially, to go through a lot of kind of training and building up to prepare for when the code's updated and continuing to identify those issues.
Thank you. Thank you. Be good, guys. Go ahead, John.
Yes, Kristen, I was wondering, did they take off? I mean, did we stop talking about tiny homes? Would tiny homes be part of the transitional housing or emergency housing?
So per the state guidance, tiny homes do not count as permanent housing because the state definition for emergency shelters and emergency housing is that they have to meet HUD requirements, which is that they have to be permanent and they have to have utility hookups. So it's not that we aren't allowing tiny homes, but they are not part of that state requirement for 1220.
Okay, would it be considered as a transitional housing then?
It doesn't meet that definition.
It doesn't meet that one either? Okay, thank you.
Hey,
Great questions. I'm just going to move us forward because this is kind of the meat of the discussion this evening, and that's to share with you some of the highlights of the approach that we're putting together for, particularly for middle housing, just because it's as Kristen mentioned, it's a pretty big shift in thinking about intensity and coordination in residential neighborhoods. So a few of these high level components of our strategy were shared with you a month ago when we last met, but I'm going to unpack them a little bit more because we've had the opportunity to refine them. First, beginning with zone consolidation, which I touched on a month ago, just thinking about ways to bring together and consolidate a handful of the city's existing zones into fewer districts for simplification. We're also going to talk about how we arrived at the appropriate density limitations for each of these new zones. And then Emily's going to share with us a few ways in which we're evaluating these draft regulations through some three-dimensional testing. And at the end, we're going to follow up on some of the incentives we talked about last time, some of which you have identified as valuable, such as retention of trees, retention of existing homes, and we're going to share with you some of our thinking of how we're going to include that in the regulations going forward. So as a reminder, just before we get into the approach itself, on the screen are the baseline requirements for HB 1110 and 1337. So those are the middle housing and ADU requirements. We're talking about at minimum 4 units on a lot. In some cases, 6 units where there's transit adjacency or affordability in the project. The bill also specifies that all zones that are subject to this bill, 6 of 9 middle housing types must be allowed. We have a discussion question on that in the next slide. And then finally, a couple of guardrails are in place in the legislation for parking at the bottom of the screen here. Okay, so on the screen now are a simplified collection of middle housing typologies that are defined in the bill. Once again, the mandate being 6 of 9 must be allowed in all the districts that we're talking about tonight. So this is where we're curious to know if council has middle housing types that you feel should be especially prioritized and encouraged across the city, or on the flip side, if there are types on the screen here or on your mind that you feel are inappropriate or should not be emphasized in the regulations going forward.
I'm sorry, you say 6 of the 9, so the other 3, what's the other 3?
So I apologize. For simplification, let me just, the 9 defined in the bill are duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, fiveplexes, sixplexes, townhouses, stacked flats, courtyard apartments, and cottage housing. This is a kind of simplified illustration of those in a little bit separate kind of categories, but for just simplification.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
So go ahead.
I was going to say, I have a question. On the stacked flats, I mean, are we just talking about like that would be like a micro apartment? Is that what we're saying? Like, we think of the stacks in the multifamily housing. Is this just a smaller version of that?
It could be. There could be as large as a whole unit on each floor. There could be 2 units on each floor. We're talking about anywhere between 8 and 1,200 square foot units. So these could be 3-bedroom units.
Okay.
Depending on the mass and the envelope restrictions on that building. Yeah.
So council, the state law clearly was written by multiple people, and it doesn't necessarily have really clear one-to-one. So part of it is the number of units. So like a duplex, triplex, multiplex, a fiveplex, that's the number of units. But then it adds in these different configurations of, it could be a townhouse, so they're vertically separated. It could be a stacked flat, which means they're horizontally separated. It could be cottages or courtyards. And those are not really related to the number. So I think what we're trying to ask, are there any of these types of configurations of how they're laid out that you like or don't like? From what we've heard from some analysis that they've done in other financial market or in similar financial markets and from developers, townhomes, duplexes, ADUs, cottage housing are really popular and likely to also be a break-even point to be able to build them. The stacked flats could over time become popular. There's condo regulation laws in the state that limit them. Courtyard apartments, that's more of apartments around a common area instead of detached cottages. That's also allowed. All of these would still, though, it's not like you have courtyard apartments, you can do 40 of them. It'd still be, you're subject to whatever the lot allows, so that 4 or 6 or however much, and you have to make it work still with all those other requirements, zoning and otherwise. So what we're trying to get at here is like, are there ones that you initially say like, yes, we really like those, we want to incentivize those, and we'd be okay either just letting them run in our code and not incentivizing them, or like, we really don't like that type of structure. We have to allow at least 6 of that list. But we could allow all 9. We don't have to allow all 9 is kind of what the question is before you all.
What's the other 3?
So we get into duplex, triplex, and then you get 4-plex, 5-plex, 6-plex. So that's where the multiplex is.
I'm looking
but
for
it
1,
sounds,
2. I get it.
it likely there a 4 to 6-plex is
That's
either
it.
also going to be a townhome or a stacked flat or a cottage or a courtyard. So it's kind of,
I'm tracking. Got you. Councilmember Troutner.
So in looking at these, like if I'm looking at a duplex, to me, it looks more like a single level. I mean, it could not, yeah.
It still has to meet our height standards that we'll
Right,
establish.
but when I'm looking at the stack flats, that makes me think of more, I don't know, the height thing. I don't know.
I grew up in a city that had a lot of stacked flats.
Yeah.
That was, the first floor was one household and the second floor was another. And it was a very they don't get built much anymore.
Right.
But it looked like a 2-story house, but one family entered in from one area, one family entered in the back area, and then they each had kind of their own side yard area. So it is something that exists. It doesn't have to be 4 or 5 stories high. It can fit in still within that scale, because we're not aiming to change really our bulk and scale and mass standards. We'll talk about that. There may be areas where staff have identified confusion that we think we should change, but we're not saying, yep, we're going to allow 5 stories now because of this.
Right, I think I'm just less familiar with that option than any of the other options.
Yes, Councilmember. Yeah.
So sort of on that vein, I do think that there's some, I'd like to preserve at least one option of single story for like our seniors, or families that have a senior with them. Having moved my mother-in-law recently, we know that's important. So,
and I should also add, I'm sorry, ADUs and DADUs are a bonus option in this, so they're not part of the 6, but we'll still count them, and they would count towards the total units allowed on the lot. So state law says ADUs are middle housing, but they're not part of the type that you have to select. We're just assuming it's part of it.
Okay.
And ADUs are frequently, I just went on a tour of one that was 2 stories, but a lot of times they are just 1 story as well.
One other consideration that you may help in your thinking about this is first focusing on the units that are in a configuration of 4, since those would have to be provided on every lot. For some of the other types that are more units, you could either not allow them, or you could allow them only in limited circumstances, like if they have a certain size parcel, or through some of the bonus provisions for affordable housing that are also required under the bill.
Okay. I'm sorry, Councilmember Michelle.
Thank you, Councilmember. Yeah, so going along with what he just said, I mean, if I could just get rid of 2, I'd get rid of 5 plexes and 6 plexes. And I know Councilmember Larmer likes the cottages, but I'm surprised she did.
Cottages and the courtyard apartments.
So I'd be good with that.
Okay, Councilmember Fincher.
One of the cottages in the courtyards too. That's going to take a larger, obviously,
Space.
I like the communal aspect of it. I've also been in some of the stacked houses back in New Jersey. They have those, and it looked like a pretty big house. That's what it looked like. So it just looked like a large house,
I can't hear you, Councilmember Fincher.
Your speaker on?
I'm sorry, I had my microphone off. I was saying that I like both the cottages and the courtyards. Have to be on a larger, I would like that on a larger lot though. And that I like the stacked houses. I've been in stacked housing, and it just looked like a large house. It wasn't gigantuan, that did not fit into the neighborhood. So I'm fine with all of these pictured. The sixplexes, is it just like another set? You have 3 together and 3 on top, like a small apartment building? Okay, I would be okay with any of these.
Councilman Boyd?
So we're asking to choose 6 of these, right? I mean,
Per state law, yes, and I'll also mention that we need to think about this across a couple different zones, which I'm going to explain in a moment here. So it is helpful to get a sense of your priorities, but they may change when we talk about the lowest and least dense of the zones and the most dense of the zones, and that's okay. Like, you could apply a different set of 6 according to the kind of intensity and intent of each zone.
okay. Well, I was looking at the duplexes, triplexes, 4plexes, 5plexes, 6plexes, and then the townhomes.
Okay. Please, Councilman Lummer.
Do we have to, I mean, we could still say all 6 or all 9 are allowed, right?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
That's right. The base requirement is 6 of 9. There's nothing that prohibits the city from allowing more.
Councilman Core, Council President Core, do you want to add anything?
I'm okay with all of them. So as you know, as mentioned, that we are pretty open. So I think I'm okay with that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Troutner.
Thank you. So this is going on a single lot, correct?
That's correct.
Well, and I think some of the things we have to think about, because we did talk about the parking a little bit, and that could change, and I think that gets really complicated when you add like a sixplex or a cottages. But I think we have to think about, where these are going, what the lot sizes are like. I think if you have like a stacked flat, I'm still trying to get past this whole concept, but you have multiple areas that you're coming into it. And so I think you have to consider like what type of housing you're doing and how people are getting access into them based on, what the lots look like. Is that kind of trying to imagine what?
So that's where our wonderful Emily and Framework come in, because they're doing some modeling to fit to different types of lots that are more realistic in Kent, because we don't have a lot of alleys. We have some neighborhoods that have alleys, but most don't. So I will say from a staff perspective, the least likely that I think will be developed in most of our residential areas are the courtyard apartments. Just financially, the way they're penciling out, it's also more of a product type that isn't financially as viable because it's not homeownership opportunities. So there's a lot of things that normally, I think the cottage housing is a product that's going to outcompete courtyards. So from a staff perspective, I don't necessarily have a strong recommendation, but I think the reality is we likely won't see many courtyard apartments. I do think putting in, we do have some large lots in Kent that are still half an acre or 3/4 of an acre or assembled into larger. And so as Jeff was mentioning before, like we could put in some thresholds of some of these more intensive types could be only if you have some of these larger lot types or minimum larger lot sizes. I don't want us to get too hung up on this. It's more of a preview taste. I hear some, like, all of these look good. I hear a couple pauses on some of the scalability for certain areas. And so we can come back to that. But we're going to show you kind of where we're moving with the lots and the zoning and how it relates to some of the comp plan work we did.
Let's go ahead and proceed. We good?
Okay. Yeah, based on the analytical questions, I think you all will find the document that follows as very helpful. Now, I just want to interject another tool that is made possible through another piece of legislation called unit lot subdivision. This is also something that we are bringing into the regulatory approach to make middle housing ownership opportunities more viable in the city. And this is recognizing the fact that historically the subdivision process to make fee simple ownership, it's kind of cumbersome and it takes a while. This tool strives to streamline that process and essentially regulates a larger parent lot, which you could think of today as, you know, a lot that may be suitable for infill development. Through this unit lot subdivision, it allows for the easy carving up of that parent lot into smaller child or unit lots to enable individual ownership of land within that larger parent lot. When it comes to the bells and whistles, the coverage, the access, the parking, all of that is applied to the parent lot and not the individual unit lots. So in many cases, this provides a little bit more flexibility for, you know, infill opportunity and for selling off smaller units on a larger lot. So that's a bit of an aside, but we will continue to share with you how this tool is going to interface with the larger framework for middle housing implementation across the city. Now I'm going to move to a concept that I think will address a lot of these questions about scalability, lot size, and intensity. So as a reminder, the baseline requirements of the bill is 4 units per lot. Now, we're recognizing that due to the lot consolidation, which is on the slide that follows, there will be many lots in these new zones that are quite large and may be suitable for more than 4 units. However, we want to make sure that we apply an appropriate scalability factor to allow for that incremental development. So this is an approach that's been taken by cities across the Puget Sound, including Auburn, Shoreline, and Sammamish. It's something that Framework has worked on in other cities, and we're finding it to be quite useful as we transition neighborhoods from single family to multiple units on a lot. And it's a way to optimize larger lots. So on the screen here, I have 2 examples to walk you through how this would work. And I will preface this by saying that this is not an approach we are suggesting be applied to all of the zones. I'll get to the more intense zones that we suggest it be applied to in a moment. But this, for example, wouldn't necessarily be something that we use on the SR1 zone or the shoreline, the SR3 zone today. This would more be applied to the SR 4.5 and above. And just to take 2 examples here, I'll show you how this works. First, taking a lot that is size 5,700 square feet. In this approach, the developer would be provided the option to pursue either a unit density of 4 units on a lot or net density of whatever development amounts to 24 units an acre. In this circumstance, the 4 units applied to that lot generate 4 units on the lot. If you use the net density requirement, and I'll stick with me here in a second, it will make sense in a moment, you would only generate 3.14 units. If you apply 24 units an acre to 5,700 square feet, you would only generate 3.14 units. So the code would allow whatever produces the higher number of units. In the larger lot example, 10,000 square feet in this case, again, provided the opportunity to either do the unit density or the net density. Because the lot's a little bit bigger, you generate more units in that calculation if you follow the 24 units an acre. So in this circumstance, you might be allowed to build 5 or 6 units depending on how we round a fractional unit result. So this, once again, is just a tool to open up larger lots to a little bit more development opportunity. And I can pause here because this is kind of a obscure and probably not the best eloquently described, but this is how we are addressing kind of the scalability factor and hits on some of the questions that have already been asked.
I also want to reiterate again, just because the zoning code says this doesn't mean that you can fit it with all of the other requirements. Water availability, sewer, all the space for utilities, like the actual running lines that we're not building over those infrastructure lines, the parking, all of those other things. So this is honestly, it looks funky, it looks wonky, but there's other controls that are in place. The point of this is that as we get into some of these larger lots, as we get into larger projects, especially as we think about some of the more, we could also apply this at a certain threshold of building, of lot size. To say at this point is when the net density option triggers in. The point is there's opportunities that we can use the incentive of you can get more units to also get other trade-offs for it as well. And so what those trade-offs are, we want to talk about in this conversation. But we want to throw this out as an idea that several cities are using to try to make this all kind of line up and scale. And then also for how the development community is talking about with this approach, they don't have to subdivide before they can even start doing their lots. And that's a 3-year process and a 3-year approach to get some of this. And so that's the second purpose of some of this.
Maybe I'm missing some, I need a little bit of help. So example 1, where you talk about 5,700 as a minimal lot.
That's based on our SR6 zone right now.
Okay, I'm okay. But your option, what's the difference between your option and the first row? Because you got 4 lots, 24 acres, 4 units, and to your right you show the 4 units. And then the 10,000, you have the same thing, 4 lots, 24 acres, and 4 units. Are they identical, or what's the difference between
Right.
the two?
So if we just do the straight, you get 4 units per lot. Regardless of the lot size, you're always going to have 4 units. So even if you have a 1 acre, 43,000 and change lot, you only get 4 units. You would have to do subdivision processes, which would add additional time into the development. And so the net density approach says, okay, if you didn't subdivide the lot into those minimum lot sizes, what could you achieve at that density?
Okay.
So it's basically saying the subdivision process can potentially slow things down in certain ways that for some, doing cottage housing or duplexes and then doing a condo for homeownership opportunities or doing them as rentals could be just as good to them as doing a full subdivision or unit lot subdivision process.
Got it, thank you. Any question down here, Brenda?
Yes. So Kristen, you're saying like building a 4-plex or a 3-plex saves you 3 years over subdividing and building 3 separate or 4 separate houses?
So the way
individual houses.
So if we were to require a property to do a subdivision in order to max out the density that's already allowed on that lot, we would be adding additional time because they would have to do a subdivision process, which is the preliminary and then the engineering and then the final and then getting to building. And that's not Kent specific, that is state law requirements for how housing gets built. And so this is saying, well, if we're aiming to create homeownership opportunities in a faster fashion, one way would be to say, we'll, instead of having to make you do the subdivision process in order to get that total density, because you're going to be allowed to get it more or less one way or the other, we could jump straight to the net density option.
Okay, thank you.
John, you okay? Are we okay down here? Councilmember Michelle, please.
Thank you. I just don't understand how you fit 4 units on a 5,700 lot or by even 4 units on a 10,000. I mean, I just don't understand this.
And you may or may not. I guess that's what I'd say. I know there are people that are finding ways to fit 2 or 3. I know there are smaller micro units that are being built. We're not saying it's guaranteed. We're not writing that promise. We're not writing that check. We're saying per the zoning, this is what it would be allowed to be. I think this would be, especially when we're looking at 5,700 or we have 3,000 square foot lots, the likelihood that they're doing this is it's more limited. When we get into the 10 to 12,000 to 1,800 square foot lots, I think that's where this conversation hits a little bit more relevant. And it's up to, they don't have to. It's, they may be allowed for 4 units, but really there's 1, or it's a conversion of their basement into a stacked flat situation or something like that.
You may want
The,
this many units, but then you have to still be able to fit into the other guidelines, which you may not be able to make it do. And get everything under all your infrastructure and everything else done.
Right.
Go ahead.
Oh, thank you. I was also just going to add that by allowing scalable density, you also provide more flexibility in site planning and for unit types. You know, it was mentioned earlier, maybe some emphasis on one-story units. You know, having a larger lot could give you more flexibility to do that. Have shared open space, shared parking areas for tree canopy. If you don't allow the scalable density, which is certainly an option, developers are going to create the smallest lots possible that are feasible for the 4 units in order to maximize their development potential. And so it could preclude some of those other unit types if those were desirable. And it's also going to have a very predictable urban form, for better or worse. You're going to have, you know, small individual lots of around 6,000 square feet and then a limited number of unit types. Developers may choose to go with slightly larger lots to support larger unit types, but in terms of maximizing the number of units, they'll be sort of forced to create the smallest lots possible, which just, for better or worse, creates a more homogenized, I guess, outcome potentially. Thank you.
We can move on? Okay. You got a question? Go ahead, I'm sorry.
So each of these 9 middle housing options we have, each one consists of 1 unit, right? Is that what I'm hearing? No?
That's not entirely correct. Some of them do, such as those cottage houses that we saw. Those are each 1 unit. But in many cases, the typologies correspond to a couple units in a lot. Duplex, those are 2 separate units that are attached side by side. Triplex, 3 units attached.
Oh, okay.
And could be
okay.
stacked. Townhouses, a couple attached, right? So it's, yeah, there's some more nuance there, and
okay.
Clarify if you have questions about specific types.
All right, okay, thank you.
Okay.
You can go ahead.
Okay, thank you. We're going to expedite the discussion on zone consolidation just for purposes of keeping this simple for tonight. I do really appreciate the thought, and you guys are thinking about this in a very high level. This is wonky stuff, so thanks for sticking with us. Now, I'm going to just preview with you the consolidation that we're eyeing for this project. Across the top row here, existing zones today, in the lowest 2 categories, so that's SR1 and SR3, those we are proposing just stay as is today. And just to make a connection to the last concept, both of those zones we aren't necessarily considering for the scalable approach. Simply put, 4 units a lot, right? Now, where there is a great opportunity for consolidation comes with the SR 4.5, SR 6, SR 8, and MRD. The existing density limitations that the city has for these zones today really does justify a consolidated zone going forward based on the requirements that we need to meet per the law. So we're suggesting, just to throw out a possible name idea, is Neighborhood Residential 1. All of these are preliminary, and we're interested in your feedback on names, but that would be one consolidation. The next level of consolidation could include MR, T12, MRT16, and MRG, those potentially consolidating into one zone NR2, and then the city's existing MRM and MRH would just be a one-to-one translation into the next increments of zones NR3 and NR4. Okay, and now, a huge part of this project is not only to comply with the state mandates, but also to implement the comprehensive plan. So we are showing on this slide here the relationship between these new zone or proposed zones to the existing zones, and then ultimately the future land use categories that are directed in the comprehensive plan that was adopted last year. Now, because of some of the zone consolidation that we're considering for this project, the city will need to make a comprehensive plan amendment, which is already on the docket for later this year, and we're aware of that, and we're working with staff on how to kind of phase that and line it up with this project. But in any case, the zone consolidation generally supports the future land use designations outlined in the comprehensive plan, makes a little bit more consolidation than exists today, but kind of supports the development typologies that are in the images here on the right.
And a
Yeah.
reminder of why we're suggesting this zone consolidation is between SR 4.5 and MRD, the development standards aren't that dramatically different. And once we move into 4 units per lot, they become almost negligible. And so the idea here was also helping from a staff implementation standpoint and the public having these lots, underlying lot requirements that really don't mean anything anymore because we have units per lot standards. It creates a lot of extra text. It creates a lot of extra confusion about things that at the end of the day, the results aren't meaningfully significant. And so that's the purpose of the consolidation. We looked at our MR 12, 16, and MRG development standards, and the densities between those aren't significantly too different. We don't have a lot of MRT and MR 12 and 16s, but we have a lot of MRG, and all of those zones all allow townhouses already. So it's not really like we're expanding townhomes anywhere. That is the preferred product, even over garden style apartments or courtyard apartments. And so the development standards are so similar between them that the thought was, let's simplify some of the questions and answers that we have.
Okay, so we're going to pause for a few more discussion questions here, and then we truly are going to preview some of the bells and whistles all of you have been talking about in terms of development standards. So now just thinking about at a very high level the names of these zoning districts that we've tossed out today, NR 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then the corresponding kind of future land use categories that we shared with you on the last slide. We're interested to know any thoughts that you have on this concept of zone consolidation, but specifically the questions on the screen here, whether or not these names are really capturing the identity. I mean, they may feel fairly nondescript at this point, but we really do want to have give you all the opportunity to weigh in on kind of the physical characteristics of these zones going forward and making sure that maybe the names line up with that intention that you have.
Please, yes.
As I say, I think for me, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, I like that it's neighborhood residential. It's a little bit more inclusive of all these different types. And I think it makes sense to consolidate those for, like Kristen was saying, the staff, the ease for the staff to understand. So yeah, I like this idea.
Any other comments down here, guys? Brenda? So no concern, I guess. And the second one on the physical care of each, or the type of housing. Any thoughts around those?
Sounds good to me.
Okay. A lot of stuff is kind of evolving, right? So it's kind of hard to kind of picture what it looked like. But I would just say
will not be the last time.
I know. I think for what I'm hearing, we're going in the right direction, right? I think as we involve, it probably make more sense to us, at least for me, right? But I don't see any roadblocks saying we shouldn't do this versus this here. At the end of the day, there is a need for middle housing, right? So we need to figure out how we can make that work in the city. So, any comments? Are we good? Okay.
Okay, appreciate it. Yep. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Emily to share with you a little bit more on the bells and whistles that we're using to, it's not just about the units per lot. There's all these other mechanisms that are being employed to make sure that it works and that everything fits and there's access.
Okay.
Hi, so I'm Emily, and yeah, I'm going to run through kind of how we actually are going to achieve these goals and kind of the nuts and bolts of the code and what goes into each of these zones to make them what they need to be. So on the screen, you see kind of 3 different buckets of things that we're going to either regulate and require or incentivize. So we have the lot itself, and that's your minimum lot size, your density, your coverage, and then we have the form of the building, so the height, the massing, so on and so forth. Some of these things are regulated in the code now, but not all of them are. We are anticipating adding a few things to better achieve our goals. And then the third bucket that you see is the incentives. So these are things that we see as they're either city priorities or intended to create more livable lots, really. And these will be optional, but really it's a trade-off. So developers will have the option of doing these things, and in return, Kent will give them various incentives to encourage that.
Molly, you like the tree retention?
I like the tree retention.
Good one. It's everybody's favorite, I think. So to kind of explore some of our different options and what we wanted, what we didn't want, and kind of our regulatory approaches, we did some model testing. So this kind of begins to show what, kind of answers to your questions. What is this actually going to look like? So on the right-hand side of the screen, you see what we are assuming are kind of the likely outcomes. And this is largely market-driven. This is kind of what we assume your typical developer is going to build. The lower 3 options are just variations on kind of your typical townhouse. It's a ground-related unit. And it's kind of the easiest way to do an ownership model, which is very appealing for developers. And then on the top of those, you see your single-family home with ADUs, which is something it sounds like Kent is already seeing lots of, and people seem to generally like quite a bit. On the other side of the screen, you see undesired outcomes. So these are very large building coverages, really large single-family homes with a lot of pavement on the site, on a very large site. And these are kind of our assumptions of things that are not desired. So we're looking forward to hearing feedback on, is this correct? Did we miss anything? Maybe I'm completely wrong here. So to summarize kind of our findings of the lot testing, we did find that indeed 4 units do generally fit on the minimum lot size that we're proposing of the 5,700 square feet. It's tight, but it's very doable. Stacking units generally tends to help. As you add units, your outdoor space shrinks pretty quickly, I think is kind of an obvious one. But things that you can do to combat this are, again, stacking your units or limiting parking, or at least limiting the amount of pavement that's on the site. Obviously difficult, but there are ways around that. So on this slide, we have more of what we actually want to see. So these are kind of our assumed desired outcomes. And there's a number of different configurations here. I'll just try and walk you through a few of them quickly. The very top one you see is 2 primary units, each of which has an ADU. So this is a great example of an ownership opportunity, either for kind of your starter home with an ADU that you could have make some income off of, or have your aging parents move into. I'm assuming desired outcome. Then the next one down is kind of your typical cottage housing scenario. It's smaller units, and then in exchange for those smaller units, there are more of them on the lot. And we do have some parking that's been slid in behind those, so it's doable. That one is shown on a larger lot. These tests were done on a variety of different lot sizes. We did some of them on the minimum lot size of the 5,700 square feet, but we also tried a couple of larger and smaller lots that are kind of representative of what you typically find in Kent. So there are some other configurations here. We have a duplex along with a fourplex that adds up to 6 units. We have 2 triplexes, kind of stack configurations. And finally, on the very bottom, we have a 6-plex, so it's 2 and 2 for 3 stories. Super tiny, yes, but it's doable. Some of them are larger and kind of depends. Yeah. Yeah, the 564 square feet per unit, yeah. It's not the biggest unit, but is doable. So yeah, out of this test, we came up with this list of desired outcomes, and these are kind of the things you typically see in these scenarios, including the retaining trees, a variety of different unit sizes, affordability. And I've highlighted things that tend to come hand in hand. For example, if you retain the existing home, affordability is more likely. And similarly, more efficient floor plates or floor plans, so stacking your units or having units that fit together more efficiently, that's going to go hand in hand with lower lot coverages. So finally, I'll wrap up with kind of a list of possible incentives. So we have these desired outcomes that we're assuming, and these are kind of the incentives that could be given to get developers to actually do some of these things without requiring them. Because some of these things do cost more money to do or are maybe less market friendly. So potential incentives would be giving additional units, or in the case of preserving an existing home, you just wouldn't count that existing home towards the density. You could also do flexible setbacks in some of the lower density zones that have those larger setbacks. You could reduce parking minimums. You could give additional height. And finally, you could give flexibility in the entry orientation, which I can explain if you need to. It's a little detail-y. So that was kind of a lot. I can go back in the slides if needed. But yeah, I'd love to hear feedback from you on what are the priorities in terms of livability, what are the things that Ken is looking for. It's preserving trees, but what else? And then secondly, are there middle housing types that you anticipate seeing a lot of, or that you don't want to see a lot of, that maybe we don't outlaw them entirely, but we can disincentivize them in certain ways? I'll leave it there for now.
Yeah, and it became really clear in the staff workshop, like, wow, we have a lot of things we have to do. Like, just with minimum requirements, with building code, state laws, federal laws. So to incentivize all of these options, like, it's very unlikely that every project is going to use any of these incentives, let alone all of these incentives necessarily. So we're kind of asking, like, what's it worth to you all? Like, which ones are the higher priority, and where's the flexibility that you're willing to look at?
Before we get that, I mean, are you saying they don't have to use any of these? Or
Yeah, so these are all incentives, meaning not requirements, but we could do in order to preserve the existing house, in order to retain trees, you could get this as some flexibility to increase the likelihood that you could be building more units potentially.
And in some of these scenarios, like in the case of giving additional height, say maybe you save a tree, then the additional height kind of makes sense because you're essentially putting the space that was going to be that tree on top of the house rather than next to the house, if that kind of makes sense. So some of these things kind of work well together.
I'm going to let Councilmember Larmer go first. I think she's going to talk about, but I'm going to let her go first.
You'll be surprised, actually. No, my question is exceptional stormwater facilities. Can you talk a little bit more about that? I'm not clear what that would look like.
Yeah, I think it's kind of a loose idea for us at this point. We are considering simplifying building or lot coverage and stormwater requirements, but essentially the idea is that if they go above and beyond and they put in this beautiful bioswale full of native plants and they take really good care of it, then in return for that we would give them an extra unit or something.
Thank you.
One comparable example you could look at is the RainWise program through King County. We've used that as a model before, and I think one of the primary objectives would be to have people retain and treat their non-pollution generating surfaces, so like roofs and decks and things like that.
Councilman Troutner.
Thank you. So a couple things. The first is if you have a neighborhood that, has fairly large lot sizes and people are interested in ADUs, if they have an HOA that has been in place that says you cannot do these structures, there is nothing that then you cannot have those in those neighborhoods.
Yeah.
That.
So we recently experienced this the other day where there's an existing covenant that someone wants to come in and build an ADU. The plat says this is what it is. You're not allowed to do this. State law says if the condition or the covenant, if the covenant was put in place effective whenever this bill was passed in 2022, I believe, maybe 2023. I think it was 2023. Then that stands. It doesn't retroactively override it.
Okay. And then as far as incentive pieces, I think that it's important to retain the existing home only because one of the things we've talked about is somebody coming in and saying, oh, I'm just going to tear down this house and build all of these lots on it. And then you've made it really expensive for people that want to have home ownership.
Right.
So.
Yes.
Councilmember Michelle, please.
Thank you. Thank you for doing these models. Looking at them just makes me really sad. We definitely need to focus on retaining trees. There's very little open space on these models, and it's definitely going to put pressure on our parks system. So anything we can do to preserve open space and retreat and trees, and then also I agree with Councilmember Troutner trying to preserve those existing homes would be good.
Councilmember Fincher, any comments?
Yes.
Please. Is your
First
mic
of all-
on? Is your mic on?
Yes.
Okay.
First of all, a local example of the retention of that you had asked about, Marley, would be Paradise parking lot plots where, if you have somebody who covers everything in pavement, then the water's going to have a hard time cleaning itself before it reaches the sound. And so, some of the things that are put in there, a number of the ways that the ground has been treated would help the garden. And one of the reasons I was one of the ones who brought that up, because when they've gone far and beyond what most other places have. And so I think that deserves some sort of incentive for that, because they're doing a lot of work for the rest of the community, everything coming down that hill, not just for their lot. That helps the city and the rest of the surrounding community. For me, retaining existing homes is important. Also retaining the trees. The having space, I don't think that it's necessary to have the space right there at their home because the lots are not large, but in that community so they can walk to a park or someplace that they can get to, walkable streets, so it's sidewalks and all. And then efficiency, I like the efficient floor plans, the items listed there, and affordability, because with the ownership opportunities, part of the goal for all of this is to be able to get more people in and more people able to buy their own home instead of having to live in an apartment. And one thing to remember is that even though some of them are less than 600 square feet, many apartments in this city are less than 600 square feet. Mm-hmm. So they are completely livable at less than 600. You're not going to hopefully put a family of 8 in there, although that's happening too. Then you're going to be able to have more selection of more choice of where you are, and it's going to be yours.
Just real quick, you made me think of something. I mean, even though maybe 500 square feet, are there any policies that say only X amount of people can live there? You just got me triggered when Councilman Fincher said something. You can have 8 people living there. Is anything stopping that?
I can answer. So there are building codes for capacity of how many people can live in structures. It does get tricky to regulate that, and that falls into code enforcement. And then it's like, okay, who's really here? Because it could be, not everyone's name is going to be on a mortgage or on a lease or on something. And so it is tricky. There are other co-living provisions and other things that we have in our code to help try to round some of that out as well.
And they would still have to have a legitimate space. They couldn't, I would imagine, could not put them in a closet, and now this closet is your bedroom, when it's going to be a coat closet normally.
Theoretically.
Yeah, theoretically, yeah.
There's also provisions in the building code that have minimums for kind of livable space, livable units, and you can also kind of add to that if needed to ensure kind of a minimum unit size if desired. So.
I was just going to say, I don't think we should restrict smaller units like that, though, because I could see those in the high-density areas over by Highline College, you know, young people, their first ownership opportunity. So I don't want to, you know, say that something like that would be too small to allow.
Yeah, the kind of the baseline that the building code sets, off the top of my head, I don't know, but it's like 200. It's pretty darn small, but it is like a decent baseline to kind of ensure reasonable unit sizes.
It's been a great discussion, really. I'm pretty excited about this here. Any thoughts, team, on my Councilman Boyd? Venture last thoughts?
I was also thinking about retaining the trees. We need to retain our trees and retain our existing homes, and also unit size, because families, you know, they're growing, they're getting larger. And with families, you need outdoor spaces. And then affordability. Can they afford it? Can we make them affordable?
Councilman Fincher, any last word before we move on?
Yeah, I would like people also think stacked living or stacked housing is not necessarily like the 2X entrances. Do not have to be like a duplex where there are two separate entrances. One I was in, you go in one entrance and then you either go upstairs or you go to the lower person's house. You know, they were both completely separate once you get in that little area. So it's quite doable and it still fits well into a neighborhood, and it provides an option for people who either want to live close but not completely together, or people who cannot afford to have the great big spacious 4,000-foot house.
Okay. I'm going to go one more time here. Councilman Trout, any departing words? Okay.
A lot of you brought up parks. Jeff, do you want to talk about kind of our thoughts on maybe doing a parks fee in lieu of open space, or? I don't think we're there yet. I don't think we're yet.
Yeah, I mean, I think more broadly, some of our discussion from the staff workshop and in our work in other communities speaks to the importance of some of the neighborhood planning kind of issues that are difficult to solve on just a development by development basis. And that could be eventually something that influences how the zoning is structured and whatnot. Because I think there's a big difference of having middle housing in an area where you can walk the parks versus not being able to. I mean, some of these areas will still continue to be fairly automobile dependent. Specifically on the parks fee in lieu, you know, that could be one way, and there are many of other ways to sort of consolidate fees or resources from projects, whether those are for infrastructure, streets and sidewalks, parks, that can provide community amenities sort of at scale. Because it's going to be difficult to add sidewalks, you know, associated with each individual project, or be able to just provide on-site open space that's going to meet all of the needs of the residents in that area. So I think the more that we can think about these issues at the neighborhood level and try to plan at that scale, I think the more successful we will be. There's a lot of work to be done on that. I think all the communities are really moving fast because of these deadlines and making important changes, but there's going to be refinements, I think, over time and ways that we can start to deal with some of these complexities. So that was kind of the thinking.
All right, thank you. Councilman Shaw, we good? Councilman Lumber?
Yep.
Okay. Council President Core, any comments you'd like to make before we close up?
Yeah, I'm good. I think my priorities are retaining trees, and access to ownership is kind of something that we definitely need to be thinking about because of the unaffordability of housing. And so this is going to be, I'm excited to see the whole plan when it comes together. Because it's going to be exciting and tricky, and Kristen and team, great job on the presentation. So thank you.
Okay, one more slide.
Council President.
We're good.
Council, not Council President.
Oh, are we good? Okay, I'm sorry, say again?
Did you have anything first? I was just going to say, I like the fee in lieu of, I'd like to be retained the way that we have it now, where a fee in lieu of park area, where it still goes in the same general vicinity instead of across town, for instance. So
I will say the fee in lieu is probably a phase 2 conversation. We are not there yet. Those are conversations that we can talk about as the project evolves. Committing to neighborhood planning and localized planning of infrastructure, I think Chad's going to kick me under the table. Those are programs that would be more of a programmatic decision that council's going to have to make because there's more administration of it, there's more focused resources. So those are things that'll be phase 2 conversations of does this make sense and what do we think? But they are opportunities for us to keep digging into.
Excellent presentation, Molly. See all the trees? There are still trees around here, okay? All right, are we done?
Yep.
We'll adjourn to 7 o'clock. Hey, good report. All right, thank you.
Thank you. I know it was a lot tonight.
No, it was good. It was good. Thank you.